Good morning and welcome to our presentation. Today, we are delighted that you were able to join us for this discussion on management of small poultry flocks. My name is Sam Nahashon. I'm professor of poultry science here at Tennessee State University, College of Agriculture, Department of Agricultural and Environmental Sciences. So our discussion will comprise of the following areas: management of breeders, housing, feeding, and finally we'll discuss disease prevention. In management of breeder birds, our goal should always be to obtain fertile eggs that are derived from healthy, well-maintained flocks. Breeder hens with poor health fail to supply the embryo with the requisite antibodies and nutrients that lead to poor performance of the offspring. So in other words, if you do not provide proper nutrition and also the requisite antibody that come as a result of vaccination of these breeder birds, then we will not be able to realize healthy offsprings. So all in all, the offsprings then will lack the antibodies that lead to significant mortality or just generally poor performance in the life of these birds. So vaccinations or vaccinating breeders or breeder dams with killed vaccines, which is a common practice in poultry production systems. An example of those could be Marek's disease vaccine, Newcastle disease vaccine, infectious bronchitis, will give high maternal antibodies for protection of the offspring. So if you give the offsprings a good start, then you will realize profitability and good performance in the long run. Now, when you are setting eggs from breeder birds, it's recommended that you only set eggs from healthy birds or healthy flocks. So you have to watch as a manager to ensure that you have healthy flocks, and in that case, then you will realize healthy offspring. So we believe that a good start with the chicks does give them actually a healthy performance thereafter. So there are certain characteristics that will undoubtedly interfere with hatchability. And this include things such as the size of the eggs. Too large or too small eggs are not desirable for a hatch. Inferior quality eggs, for instance, eggs that have blood spots in them, also are not good, or abnormal air cells, because we require good air exchange during incubation. The other factor is poor shell quality. Poor shell quality or dirty shells could lead to contamination and then spoilage, and then loss of entire hatches, thousands of eggs if you are a large-scale producer. So you want to avoid misshapen or cracked eggs or poor shelled eggs, because bacteria can actually penetrate through the shells of these eggs. Avoid too old birds. So the age of the birds also is a factor. So avoid using too old birds. There's what we use, the term we use is called spiking. That is, if you determine that your flock or your breeder flocks are too old, you can actually start replacing them gradually with the younger birds. And we do this especially with males. So consider the age of birds as well. There is a direct, an inverse correlation between fertility and the age of the flock. So you need to keep that in mind. Dirty shells, I mentioned that. So you want to make sure that you avoid those as much as possible. Now, to ensure that clean hatching eggs are actually collected, you have to have very good breeder house management. And it's key to obtain clean eggs for hatching. So in other words, we need to have adequate nesting space. We need to have clean nesting materials, clean dry floors, and frequent of egg gathering if necessary. These are very, very essential. So we don't recommend that you store your eggs for too long, because the quality of the eggs actually deteriorates with the length of storage. It is recommended that hatching eggs be stored in cool place. We usually recommend about 60 to 65 degrees Fahrenheit storage place. That is if you're going to be storing these eggs for at least 7 days. But then if you're going to be storing the eggs longer than those 7 days, then you need to lower that temperature to about 55 degrees Fahrenheit. And it's not recommended to store hatching eggs for more than 14 days. Now, there are factors that would influence hatchability, and this would include fertility, and I talked about that in the previous slide. And then we have genetics. So, and the only way you as a producer can influence genetics is by selecting or obtaining birds of non-genetic background. And that is important for you because you have variations in production and performance in birds based on genetics. And then nutrition, which is part of management. You want to ensure that your birds are fed well. Work with the co-op, purchase feeds of non-quality, of non-nutritional value, and read the labels to ensure that your birds are actually acquiring the nutritional regimens that they would require for optimum performance. Diseases such as chlorrum would also influence hatchability. And then the egg quality, both internal and external egg qualities would do that. And then pretty much handling of the eggs. And this comes as key for you as a producer. Make sure that you don't mishandle these eggs and break the shells. So with the exception of genetics, really, the rest of these factors can pretty much be controlled by you as a producer or as a manager. Now, let's talk a little bit about housing, because this is part of management and is very, very key as well. So we know that the choice of poultry housing depends on the purpose for the birds, number one, and also the size of your operation. For instance, if you're just going to be raising your birds in the range, definitely you're going to be exposing them to the outside environment. They're going to be predators. They're going to be birds flying overhead. So you have to learn how to manage those. So coops and fencing are ideal for small poultry flocks. And also these must be raised definitely from the ground. And we'll see that in a little bit. So the purpose of housing is to protect the birds from the elements such as weather, predators, injury, or theft. Therefore, coops, when we are utilizing coops, if we are small-scale producers, we should build these on high, well-drained areas and with concrete floors, because concrete floors are easy to clean. So if you can afford concrete floors, please make sure you do that. And then it's also recommended that you orient these coops windows east to west, because you also want the sun to shine through the facility, and it also sort of helps with the warmth and also sanitization of the housing, in other words, or drying rather of the houses once you clean those. So make sure, again, you have adequate space. And for those of you who are raising dual purpose birds, really it's recommended that you use about 3 dual purpose birds per meter. And then if you're just raising the meat-type birds, for instance, broilers, these heavy birds, about 0.75 square feet per bird usually is sufficient. If you're raising your flocks outside in the environment, range flocks, really they do have laxity of space. But again, in the evening when they retreat to the coops, then you need to make sure that they have adequacy of space. So again, I stress that you use concrete floors because besides being easy to clean, they prevent rodents, snakes, and predators from digging under the walls and the floors. And that becomes a very important aspect of your design. So if you cannot afford the concrete floors, then you need to bury the wire that you're going to be using for the hedges at least 12 feet deep. 12 inches deep, so that at least predators cannot burrow under the ground to reach your flock. And also within these small housing systems, you want to provide patches too, where the birds could actually perch. And these should be more than 4 feet above the floor. And also when you use patches, also you sort of minimize the requirement for square footage. You can house a few more birds in that sense. Okay, let's look at feeding poultry. And again, this is part of management. So why should we feed poultry? So number one, we feed poultry to meet their nutritional requirements, of which 75% actually goes towards maintenance and 25% goes towards production, which constitutes growth, egg production, and reproduction. So there are 6 major nutrients that you should be concerned about in feeding poultry. And this would include carbohydrates, which are derived from cereal grains, really. And the basic one is going to be corn. And then we also have the protein sources. Now, the carbohydrates will contain less than 20% crude protein and less than 18% fiber. And then we have fats, proteins, and the proteinaceous feedstuffs will contain more than 20% crude protein. And then we have vitamins, minerals, water, and plant extract too. So we consider plant extracts as part of these nutrients. They usually do carry and identified growth factors. So they have been shown to improve poultry performance. So make sure that you read the feed labels. So if you are acquiring your feed from the feed mill or from a co-op, make sure that you have a habit of reading those labels, and also establish a good relationship with the feed manufacturers so that at least you can have a discussion with them in terms of the nutritional content of those feeds. Now, the potency, and looking at vitamins, the potency of vitamins usually declines with longer storage period of the feed, and also just basically the conditions by which you store these vitamins. So in poor conditions, if you suspect such, or if you know that you did not have good storage conditions, or if those conditions actually did change adversely, then you should fortify. And fortification means just adding more of the vitamins to your diets or to the feed, so that at least your birds do receive adequacy of these vitamins. Again, I have to stress that. You have to make sure that you do have sufficiency of those vitamins. Otherwise, you'll start seeing signs of deficiency within your flock. So just adding a little bit of fortifying will not harm your birds. So there's no much of toxicity, especially the B vitamins. So you can still add as much as you want in the feed. So higher levels of really dietary vitamins are not usually harmful, they're not usually toxic, but extra vitamins may be necessary. And again, you have to consider the factor that they are also expensive. So if that's not an issue for you, then it's good to do that supplementation. In terms of minerals, these are also very essential and must be provided in inadequacy. Specifically, calcium and phosphorus are very essential for bone and eggshell formation. So you're dealing with younger birds, you're dealing with laying birds. Those two minerals are going to be very, very essential. So check the feed labels again. And we know that laying hens require higher amounts of calcium and phosphorus. For instance, with the white leghorn at peak production, about 30 weeks of age, would actually require about 3.6% calcium. The broilers usually about 1%, 0.9 to 1% calcium. So this table really presents an example of some of the nutrients that we term essential. Not that they are more important than others, but I just wanted to show you what variations we have with the different types and varieties of poultry. So if you look at white leghorn, and we are looking at energy in kilocalories per metabolizable energy per kilogram of metabolizable energy. And also we are looking at protein and calcium. So if you look at white leghorn, we see that the range of the energy requirement is about, 2,800 to 2,900 kilocalories of metabolizable energy per kilogram. As when you compare that with the larger birds, that is the broilers, you find that the broilers usually will require higher energy levels than the white leghorns. And if you look at the guinea fowls, they are somewhere there in the middle. The dual purpose birds are going to require less, definitely. And then if you look at protein, there's also those variations as well. You see, for instance, the white leghorn requirement for crude protein at 30 weeks of age is about 17 to 18%. Whereas if you look at a dual purpose birds, that drops to 15 to 18%. Whereas in broilers, you're requiring actually 20 to 21%. And then calcium also has those variations as well. So when you notice that your birds are actually not doing well, or your layers are not producing the adequate number of eggs that you would expect, then usually the first thing that I suspect is the feed. So I would withdraw the feed from the birds, and if possible, have it tested for nutrient composition. So it is also advisable that you consult with a veterinarian, because sometimes we don't know what might be causing the poor performance in our flock. So it's always important to consult with a veterinarian. Even if you lose some birds, don't just bury them or incinerate them immediately. Make sure that a veterinarian actually is aware that you're losing these birds, and then they can do some post-mortem and diagnosis of the same. So we know that birds will consume feed so long as they are able to drink water. So clean water is very, very important, and it must be available to birds at all times. So reduction in water and feed consumption is usually the first sign of illness in poultry flocks. So if you go to your feeders, you find that your birds have not actually depleted or consumed significant amount of feed as you expect, then know that there's something wrong. So it's also important to note that the use of anticoccidial drugs in birds that are raised on the floors is very essential. So you have to make sure that if your birds are going to be raised on the floors, then you use anticoccidial drugs, because these protozoal organisms live on the ground, and it's easy for your birds to pick those up. So if you are going to be consuming these birds, or if you're going to be selling these birds to consumers, you also need to be aware that there is a withdrawal period, a 7-day withdrawal period of these drugs before these birds are actually sent to the market. So I think we are going to stop there in discussing feeding, and I want us to transition to talk a little bit about the diseases of small poultry flocks as well. Now, we can easily distinguish between healthy birds from sick birds, number one, by knowing the amount or detecting the amount of feed actually and water that these birds are consuming. And also by looking at the appearance of droppings. For instance, if you have coccidiosis, if you walk into your poultry house, you will see blood-laced droppings or feces. So that's usually a good sign of an issue with the digestive tract, and coccidiosis usually has that problem, or diarrhea for that matter. That's quite unusual. So if you see that occurrence, then you know that there's something wrong with your flock. So look at general activity of the birds too. Healthy birds will be pretty much active roaming around the floor, while sick birds will just be droopy and have ruffled feathers. And as a manager or as a producer, you need to know these things very well. And then, you know, in the long run, you can see a decline in actually performance, for instance, in growth, or in the case of layers, you'll see a sudden drop in egg production. So usually in many cases, not for layers, when you start seeing really misshapen eggs or shells that are disformed or malformed, or start seeing also shells that are very, very soft. These could be diseases, either nutritional or caused by other organisms. So you need to pay attention to those as much as possible. Now, there are several causes of diseases in poultry, and these include pathogenic microorganisms, such as we have those diseases that are caused actually by viruses. And those will be, for instance, Newcastle disease, infectious bronchitis, and there's a bunch of them there. And then we have bacterial diseases too, for instance, salmonellosis, Clostridium fall cholera, some of which could be transmitted through the eggs, vertically, for instance, salmonellosis. And then we have protozoal diseases, and examples of that is coccidiosis, which I just mentioned a few moments ago. And then we have fungal diseases. The common ones are aspergillosis and mycotoxicosis. And many of these fungal diseases are usually as a result of poor environment and feed storage. So the fungal diseases could come about with poor storage, storing your feed in wet areas, or just utilizing feed basically that has been manufactured from ingredients that have been that have not been dried properly. And then we have parasites, mites, which is a nuisance in poultry production systems. Now, the other causes of avian diseases will be nutritional, and I mentioned those: deficiency of calcium, phosphorus, deficiency of vitamins, minerals. All those could result into diseases as well. Genetics, there are genetic problems too. There's nothing much you can do about those other than, again, going back to the source of your birds. Inbreeding actually can be a problem of perpetuation of some of the genetic issues that are detrimental to poultry production. So in as much as possible, we avoid inbreeding in flocks. And then metabolic diseases, those are associated with nutrition. And then we also have behavioral issues, and those could be things like pecking. For instance, if you overcrowd your birds, if you don't feed them enough, then they develop these vices of picking on each other. Now, the external parasites really include things like lice, mice, ticks, fleas, flies, and other less important forms. And we have more than 2,000 species of these, which are found exclusively in birds. So these are not blood-sucking parasites as such, and really they just feed on the feathers and scales, and they just really cause considerable irritation and annoyance to the fowls. Now, that irritation and annoyance really takes birds' attention away from what they should be doing. They should be eating, and that feed should be converted into eggs or muscle for meat. So yeah, for sure, the parasites do cause a lot of harm in poultry flocks, and they can actually contribute to very, very significant losses in poultry and also poultry performance. Now, in terms of disease prevention, there's usually this phrase that I like to put forth much of the time, such that disease prevention practices are best illustrated as a chain that is as strong as its weakest link. So as much as possible, you want to avoid any practices that favor disease outbreaks, because this will continue to devastate poultry production, both in large scale and in small producer units. So you want to make sure that you break those possibilities, or you avoid those possibilities of disease outbreaks. We recommend use of preventative medicine. For instance, if you're raising just small flocks, you can actually purchase medications, for instance, antibacterial medications from the co-op or from subscriptions or prescription from the veterinarians. But again, what I usually recommend as much is that just obtain disease-free birds or disease-free chicks. Have a good relationship with the source of your flock, with the hatcheries, so that at least you know what kind of flock you're actually obtaining to bring to your premises. Now, in many hatcheries, they will actually give you a certificate of vaccination and any other assurance that these birds are actually free of diseases. So again, that relationship that you do establish with the hatcheries and the sources of your birds is very, very key. And then on the other hand, you just want to observe maximum hygiene practices within the houses. Clean, clean, clean. If you are ready to remove one batch of your birds, you want to bring in a new batch. So just scrap everything out. Remove all the litter if your birds are on the floor. on litter material. So just clean everything out, bring in fresh litter material as you bring in your new birds as well. And then vaccination usually is very essential to protect your birds actually in the long run. And I mentioned that you need to vaccinate your breeder birds because that will give actually immune competence to your chicks as they hatch, at least for the first 2 to 4 weeks of age or in early age. So you keep your birds isolated, your young birds isolated from older birds, and this goes without, much contradiction or arguments. Usually the younger birds are more susceptible to diseases than older flocks. So you want to make sure that they are separated. Again, I mentioned that the immunity of the young birds is pretty low. They're just building it up. And so they need that good start and strong start to build it up. So make sure that you do isolate them and raise them in isolation from older birds. And again, I mentioned the cleanliness of the litter material. Do all in, all out. If you bring in new flock, bring in new litter material. Now, when you're attending your birds, now if you have all these different ages amongst your flock, again, we recommend that you actually start with the younger birds because they have lower immunity, and then transition to the older birds. And again, as a precautionary measure, as a biosecurity measure, you also need to change your footwear. You need to change your clothes as you transition from younger birds to older birds. And then usually what I tell many producers is that since we know that we are the worst, we people are the worst carriers of poultry diseases, so we have to avoid just moving from house to house and then bringing visitors to our premises. That doesn't work well with poultry production. If you are someone who goes to the shores, then make sure you have that practice. You take your birds to the shores, don't bring them back to the rest of the flock, because that's one easy way of bringing diseases to your flock. Now, depopulation is one of the most effective ways of controlling diseases in poultry. And also with depopulation, we usually recommend that we leave the houses bare for some time, at least to break the disease cycles. And this depends. Once you scrub, clean, and disinfect the houses, then just let them sit for about 7 days or so before you bring in new flocks. But again, make sure that these houses are completely dry and disinfected. And we know that the longer the premise actually remains vacant, the lower the threshold of surviving pathogens will you find in these houses. Now, for those of you who are small producers, and those of you who really raise your birds outdoors or partially outdoors, something that I like to bring to the table for you to consider is the exposure of your birds to overhead, or flying birds. Because you know very well, if your flock is raised on the outdoors, then you have waterfowl, you have all these other birds that are going to fly overhead, and their droppings will just come down to the ground where your birds are. And we know very well, waterfowl and all these other birds, the wild birds, are actually prominent carriers of poultry diseases. So in as much as possible, even though you are not able to prevent that, you need to make sure that your flock is vaccinated. So at least you have that preventative measure within your flock for the things or for those diseases that you don't have really good grasp of control over. Now, you also want to make sure that rats, mice, and other rodents are kept out of your poultry feed and houses. It's very hard to keep rats and mice out of feed, but again, if you can use traps, you can use bait, do everything that you can, because again, these are sources of diseases to your flock. And, so just ensure that that is taken care of, because again, just one of these diseases can just wipe your flock very, very quickly, causing a lot of losses to your production. Now, within the housing, and again, still talking about cleanliness in terms of controlling diseases, avoid as much water spillage as possible, because we know any wet spaces or wet litter materials can be a breeding ground for diseases as well. So make sure that every time there's someone who is attending these areas, if you see water spillage, you have to scoop that material up, replace that with dry material. So cleaning is important. Disinfecting is important. Collecting dead birds, incinerating dead birds, not just burying those on the ground. And then working with a veterinarian to determine the root cause of the mortality within your flock. So keeping diseases away from your birds and keeping birds away from diseases becomes key for you as a poultry producer. Now, one of the areas that I usually retreat to when talking about diseases and health of flocks is biosecurity. And this is going to be the last piece of our discussion. And primarily biosecurity refers to keeping people and disease agents from your flock, and also keeping the flock from people and disease agents. So we know very well, and I mentioned this earlier, that man is the worst carrier of most diseases that are faced by the poultry industry or poultry production enterprises. So let's make sure that we avoid visitors. We avoid visitors just driving into our premises because we know that they could bring these problems to our production. And especially, and I will say this, especially if these are individuals who are also raising poultry. They actually stand a higher chance of bringing poultry diseases to your premise. So you have to think twice before you actually invite them into your premises. But make sure that you take all precautionary measures. Make sure that you have a footbath at the gate so that before individuals or even vehicles come to your premises, they walk over the footpath with disinfectant, and then have a place where they can actually change clothes and shoes, take a bath, take a shower before they come to your premises. So you have to be very savvy about those things when it comes to controlling diseases. So we've talked about man, who is really the worst carrier of poultry diseases. Then we have rodents, we have vehicles, we have fomites, just things that you use daily, like crates that you use to carry your birds from house to house or from one farm to another. So if you purchase some birds from another farmer and they put those birds in crates, those crates could be carrying diseases as well. So you have to be wary of those. Those have to be disinfected very well before they are used or transferred from one farm to the other. And then just avoid domesticated animals as well, dogs, cats, and so forth. They can also be very good carriers of poultry diseases. So you have to be very, very careful with mingling those with your poultry flocks. So as a biosecurity measure, we recommend that all equipment, feed bins, and everything else in those houses must be cleaned and disinfected regularly and in between flocks. And this is really the most important and significant part of raising poultry. Is just cleanliness, because just one simple mistake can cause you a lot of harm and losses. And so it is essential to practice the all in, all out, where you just don't continue mingling flocks. If you are able to, practice the all in, all out that is most desirable in poultry production. So bring in new flock, take away the old flock. Don't mix older birds with the younger birds. And then special considerations would really apply to the range birds and also turkeys, which are usually raised. Could be raised outdoors. So you want to make sure that these birds that are raised outdoors again are vaccinated. And that serves as a precautionary and preventative measure for any possibility of a disease occurrence. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to entertain some questions. You've been a great audience. And again, thank you for attending this Small Farms Expo and this presentation. Thank you.